Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. In this video I am going to show you how you can use the Batch API method in SharePoint to create items from a data source in Power Automate. What we are going to do as the sample is take this Excel sheet with 15,000 items in it and import that into a SharePoint list. The reason you would want to use the batch method as opposed to the standard applied to each method, there are two really. The first is performance. It's much quicker to do, and the second is the number of API actions that you are going to consume. If I was going to import this Excel sheet using the standard method, that would use 15,000 API actions and it would take a very long time to complete. So let's just go over what the normal way is very quickly, and I'll show you the new method. So here we've got our list, and this list is currently populated, I think, with 1,000 items that I brought in from this flow. And this is a very simple flow. Just do list rows present in a table. I have probably got pagination turned on and told it to return me 1,000 records. And then we just go into an apply to each loop and we create those items as standard. Now this works fine, but just to create those 1,000 records took 7 minutes and 15 seconds. So it's not particularly fast. This is actually a follow-up video to a video that I did about deleting items using the batch method. And that went down quite well, and other people have asked me how to create items. Now, hang around to the end of this video because I'm going to show you a faster way and then a slightly more complicated but even faster way. So let's just, first thing I need to do is empty out this list. So I'm just going to run this batch delete that I made in the last video. Okay, so that list is now empty. Now, one thing I just wanted to point out with this standard method is it's super easy to do. So if you haven't got many items to create, just stick with this method. It might not be the fastest, but if the data set isn't that big, then it's good. So let's go to the next method. So I have made this for you so that you can recreate it at your end as easily as possible. This will use the SharePoint Batch API to create items in a SharePoint list. So our list has got 3 columns, and I am going to do first action, list rows present in a table, and again I've just set the threshold to 1,000 for the purposes of this demo. So that it doesn't take too long. I've also put this Excel mockdata.xlsx on my blog, so you can download that if you want to play with it. So once we've got the data, we initialize a variable loop control, which is an integer, and the value is initialized to -1. And then we go into this scope action, which you will be able to, from my blog, you'll be able to copy this entire flow with the sample data. And I've also made this create SharePoint items scope available if you want to integrate this into one of your existing flows. So the first thing we get into is this settings. You will need to amend the values in here, the site address, the list name, and the batch size. I suggest you leave the batch size at 1,000. Obviously you will need to change these values appropriately. Then we go into a generate SP data action. This is a select action, and we use the output from the values from Excel. Now at this point your data source is mainly irrelevant. It could be SQL data, it could be from Excel, anywhere really, or even another SharePoint list. But the important column is this first metadata column with this JSON action in it. This generates a string which will end up being sp.data.listName, which in my case is invoices.list_item. And then we just put in the SharePoint column names and the value that we want to put into them. You need to use the internal column names. So if you have renamed a column, it will still be expecting a reference to the internal column name. So this is one of those situations where the original create item connector, as we see it over here, is a bit superior. In this, we have to use the internal column name on SharePoint. So then we go into a batch template action, which is just a compose action. And this brings together the SharePoint change set string, which we need to pass in our batch action. You don't have to touch this. This is just going to be compiled for you automatically. This important part here, row data, where it's got a pipe symbol and row data, will be replaced in the next step. So then we go into a do until loop, and we're going to wait until loop control is equal to 0. So we go into a select action, and this is probably one of the most complicated parts of the flow, really, these two expressions, or this particular expression. Let's put it over here so we can see it a bit better. So what this does is takes uses the iteration index of the do until loop to keep taking records from our original data array. In this case is the Excel list. So it's going to get 1,000 on the first loop, and then another 1,000, and then another 1,000, until there are none remaining in that original array. And that is what that take and skip actions expression does. The reason that the batch size is 1,000, by the way, is 1,000 is the maximum that can be submitted to SharePoint in one batch action. So that is why it's 1,000. If you set it to more than 1,000, it does not crash, but it will not work properly. So in the select action, all we are doing is replacing the row data element, which was in here, with the actual change that we want to make, which is the string of the current item in our array. So then we set this loop control is set to the length is the output of this select. So we know how many records we got. So initially, this, if you've got 2,400 records in a data set, the first time it will be 1,000, then 1,000, then 400, and then 0. This batch data action simply joins the output of this select with a new line character to make it one single string that we can submit to SharePoint in one go. And then we go into our send batch action. Again, you don't need to really worry about this. The only thing you really need to concern yourself is try not to touch it, because this string is extremely fussy. If you change one new line character or the output slightly, it just doesn't work. So it's very specific format. And then this results brings back the entire string of results from SharePoint. So each individual action that we specify, in this case they're all going to be create actions, will return a distinct result from SharePoint, and that comes through as one big string. And you can manipulate that string that comes back to make a bit more sense. So I'm just going to run this now, and we'll keep it at 1,000 rows. And it takes a couple of minutes, I think. Let's have a look. Okay, so that is now complete, and it took 1 minute and 42 seconds. So it was a big time saving over the original flow, and obviously used far fewer API actions because this do until loop ran 3 times. I guess on the final time there was no items left in the array, so that worked pretty well. What you will notice is this send batch SharePoint API action took 2 minutes, then 3 seconds, then 0 seconds. So the bottleneck has shifted from Power Automate to SharePoint. And then this is where we come on to the sort of phase 2 of this. So this flow is on my blog, and you can download the whole thing. And if you've only got, say, 10,000 items that you are trying to create on SharePoint, then this will do a good job. It's not particularly complicated, but I was sort of thinking to myself, I wonder if we could do a version that was a little bit faster and handed some of that bottleneck back to Power Automate. So I did a slightly modified version of this. Let's have a look at that. I'm just going to run that delete flow again while we're having a look at this flow. So this is almost the same, not too much to see up here. And then in this section, the do until, there is an apply to each. The first thing I want to show you is that this has got concurrency control switched on. And then in the apply to each, the source is this expression. Let me just explain what this does. So we've already got a bunch of records in our loop control, and that will be a batch of 1,000. So we're going to have 1,000 records in there, in this example. So first we need to check if there are no records remaining, and if that is the case, then we just submit an empty JSON array. But then if there are records, then it does a new create array with 2 elements. The first one does a take from the output of the select, divides the length of the output of select by 2. So it takes the first half of the records from that select. And the second half of the array is a skip with the same calculation. So this one is going to take the first batch of records, and this one is going to take the second half of the records. What this means then is that this applied to each will have 2 arrays, one with the first batch of records, one array with 2 records, one with the first half of the records from the select, and one with the second half. What that means is that we can then send 2 batches of data to SharePoint in parallel. So in this particular instance, it will send 2 batches of 500 records, which obviously results in a much faster execution time. So let's see if that list is empty yet. Yes, it is. So if we run this, no, wrong flow, this one. Okay, there we are. 48 seconds for that one to complete. So if you compare that to the original with the apply to each loop, that took 7 minutes and 15 seconds, and this took 48 seconds. So if you've got a large amount of data, this is certainly a quicker way of pumping that data into SharePoint. Now, if you want to implement this yourself, you can go over to my blog, go to this flow code and implementation section. Now you can download the sample Excel data here. This is an export of the first method that I showed you, which uses the Batch API but doesn't go the extra mile for the performance. And then here is the threaded one. So that you can just download and import into your environment. You can also, I've also put just the scopes on the blog. So you can just go into flow and create a new flow. You can go over to the blog, press copy, go to your flow, do new step, go to my clipboard, do a Control V, and that will create that for you. And then you can just go into settings, modify this, and then you need to replace this value here with your new data that you're going to be importing, and then you can just work from there. You don't really have to worry about any of the complexity of this flow, and I have tried to make it as simple as possible, but it's obviously an advanced-ish topic. So see how you get on, give it a try. If you get stuck, let me know in the comments on YouTube or directly on my blog, and I will try to help you out. I'm curious to know how much time this saves in your flows, so if you do find it useful, please let me know. Good luck, See you in the next video. Bye bye.